Welcome to the Inner Entrepreneur Podcast. My name is Paul Ryan, and today we're going to talk about the truth about wealth and spirituality. Why is wealth and spirituality such a thing? Why do people think you can be wealthy but not spiritual? And why do people think that to be spiritual you mustn't be wealthy? It's like we have this Simpsons cartoon image of Montgomery Burns. Do you remember him? This cranky, miserable, old mean man who looked after his money, his factory, his wealth above all things. And of course he was miserable. He had no friends, he had no family, he's nothing but his miserable wealth, and he would do anything to keep his wealth. Nothing was more important than holding on to his money. Why do so many of us have this image of the wealthy, of that mean old Mr. Burns? And yet we also have the image of the revered holy man who owns nothing, who wants nothing, and who has given up everything in his pursuit of spirituality, of enlightenment, of God. And somehow so many of us have gotten this idea that to achieve that level of spirituality in our life, we must give up on materialism. We must give up on the good things in life. And we also have this notion of those that have achieved wealth, well, they must be mean, old, miserable men. Of course, none of these are true. Not only are they not true, but these ideas simply do not serve us. But I think these ideas are ingrained in us. They are centuries old. And if you come from a Christian tradition, you'll be very familiar with this notion from the Bible. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get through the gates of heaven. And what an image for us, because how can a camel get through the eye of a needle? So is that basically saying that a rich man is never going to heaven? Why would you want to be a rich man if you can never get to heaven? Whether you believe it or not, there's an image there that says you should be poor, you should not accumulate wealth because wealth is bad. I don't think that image serves us, and I do not think it's something we should have in our psyche. Isn't it interesting that the church is so wealthy, it has accumulated so much wealth, and yet the message to the rest of us is that we need to be poor? And for all of my life, I've been called along the path of spirituality. I've had a tremendous interest in spirituality and exploring myself in personal growth and meditation. But I've also been drawn to create wealth in my life, to material things, and to creating prosperity and abundance in my life. So I've always been drawn to those things. And maybe somewhere in my psyche, I have something that tells me that that's not right, that you can't have both of those. Because honestly, for a lot of my life, I struggled with those things. But then maybe a lot of people struggle with those. A number of years ago, a survey was done, and over 70% of people said that they wanted to be wealthy, they wanted to be millionaires. And yet, when we look across the world, something like only 1% of the world's population actually are wealthy, actually are millionaires. We have 70% of people wanting to be wealthy, and a very tiny, maybe as little as 1% of people ever actually achieving wealth, ever actually achieving millionaire status. So we have this conflict between people wanting to be wealthy and most people never actually achieving wealth. So then the question is, does a belief that says to you that wealth is not good, that wealth is not spiritual, that you will never get to heaven if you're wealthy, does a belief of that serve you, or is it actually holding you back? So it seems to me that many people struggle with this concept. And honestly, for many years, it was something I struggled with myself. And how it would work for me is that I would spend maybe months focused on the spiritual side of my life and thinking about meditation and yoga and spiritual study. And I would devote myself for many, many months to the spiritual side of my life, while obviously working away and running my business. And then after many months, I would become a little bit dissatisfied with that and go, no, I need to grow my wealth. I need to develop my business. And I would find my attention shifting over to how can I become more successful? How can I build and grow the business? And I would do that for months and months and months. And then I would find that I'm neglecting the spiritual side of myself, and I would shift back. And I seemed to spend so much of my early years shifting from one to the other. What was interesting to me around that time is I would go to a business conference and I would fit right in. I would meet with other business owners. I would meet with people who wanted to grow their business and build wealth. And I was with my tribe. I conversed with these people. We had similar interests, similar passions, and we were interested in learning about growing our business and investments and learning about wealth. So I would easily fit into that group of people. But I knew there was a part of me that was different, because I was also deeply interested in the inner journey, hence the inner entrepreneur. But I was deeply interested in exploring myself in Eastern traditions and philosophies and meditation. But I was mixing with business people who had no interest in spirituality. They were people who grew their business, grew their wealth, then they watched sports and they drank beer, and they did not want to have a conversation with you about spirituality. So I kept that piece to myself. But on the other side, I would then go on a weekend retreat and I would mix with people who were deeply involved in the spiritual world. It could be a meditation retreat, a yoga retreat, or a personal development retreat. So I'd be mixing with people who were really interested in that world. But I also found a common denominator among that category of people. I found that they seemed to have some degree of a poverty consciousness. They seemed to have a belief or accepted reality that they were spiritual people, and spiritual people didn't pursue material possessions. And somehow it was a dirty word to talk about growing your business or growing your wealth. So it seemed when I was in that camp of the spiritual seekers that I didn't fit there either. So I could go into either camp and mix with the people and enjoy their company, but somehow I didn't really fit. And this went on for year after year. And I began to think, I'm torn between both sides. What am I? Am I a capitalist? Am I someone who wants to grow my business? Or am I a spiritualist? Am I someone who wants to meditate and grow their inner world? And I really struggled with both. It was a battle for me. I remember one day leaving my office and travelling to a beautiful park that's about a mile from my office. And I went rambling into an area of the park I didn't go, and I was grappling with this idea. I was saying to myself, Paul, choose. Which path are you going to go down? Because you're struggling here and you need to choose one over the other. And I was reluctant to walk away from the success that business was bringing me. But I also had a sense that if I headed down the spiritual route, that would bring me more fulfillment ultimately and more happiness. And as I grappled with this idea, unable to make a decision to get a clear inspiration on which direction I should head, I turned around a corner and I saw this magnificent flagpole standing about 100 feet tall. Now I stared up at this flagpole as it stood before me, and I noticed how firmly and how strongly it stood on the pedestal. But I also noticed how the flagpole was supported. So on either side was a steel rod attached to the top of the flagpole and attached firmly into the earth. Now these two opposing steel rods were pulling in either side of the flagpole, and because of the equal tension either side of the flagpole stood erect. I'm sure you've often observed this. But in that moment I had an inspiration and I realized the flagpole was me. I was seeing a representation of my own life. To my right side was that steel rod pulling and calling me to pursue a spiritual life. And on my left side was the other steel rod pulling and calling me to pursue a materialistic life, to grow wealth, to grow a business. But I saw that in the flagpole, that both of those opposing tensions was what held the flagpole perfectly strong in the wind, and it stood erect and tall. And in that moment I realized I was neither of those tendencies. I was a flagpole. That for me to be pulled straight along the road that was my path, was my destiny, was true to me, I needed both of those tensions. I needed to be pulled towards growing my wealth, and I needed to be pulled towards developing my spirituality, because the real me had both of those potentials. The real me was called to build wealth, and the real me was called to explore the spiritual side of my nature. And I realized that both of those tensions pulling against me was what carved me, was what made me the man, the person I needed to become. And in that moment, it finally dawned on me that I didn't need to fight the battle. I didn't need to choose one or the other. I needed to accept that this is who I am, that the whole of me, the true nature of me, was an individual that was drawn to pursue both. In that moment of realization, there was a tremendous weight lifted off my shoulder. I no longer needed to decide if spirituality was right or if growing wealth was right. I just needed to be me. I needed to follow my passions. I needed to follow my interests. And I needed to accept the fact that in certain business circles, I was an oddity. I was this guy who wanted to grow his business, but also interest in spirituality. And in spiritual circles, I was also this oddity. I was this successful businessman who wanted to come and study meditation. But the essence of it is that was me. And I decided from that moment forward, I would just pursue my interest in no matter what it was. I would pursue my interests and I would be that man. And that is the life I have lived ever since. And that's a very interesting perspective to take. And back to our numbers, 70% of the world's population say they want to be wealthy and 1% get there. So that means there's potentially a lot of people who never get the wealth they want and are a little bit pissed off and angry about that. And they've got to find a way to justify that. And a great way for their ego to justify that is, instead of going, well, what do those people know that I don't know? How can I learn? How can I grow? How can I develop? What they do is they criticize and they throw stones and they try and paint all wealthy people as this Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. And I wonder if this is where the idea of wealthy people being evil. Because if you're not wealthy, and if you secretly would love to become wealthy, which is what we know 70% of people want, but you never quite manage to do it, well, you've two choices. You can accept responsibility for that and you can ask, what can I learn? How can I grow? You can take on ownership for creating that wealth in your life, or you can protect yourself from that and blame wealthy people and say they're evil, they're mean, they're corrupt, they're dishonest. And I remember people living in beautiful homes and nice cars and wondering, how can I get there? But I was never angry and I was never resentful. I was eager. I was curious. And I always just asked myself, what do they know that I don't? What are the secrets? What is the information they have? What is their perspective? How are they thinking? How are they living their lives that allow them to have that luxury that I cannot have? And when you seek that out earnestly, honestly, and you explore that, then you begin to learn the lessons of the wealthy, and then you begin to learn, how can I change? You see, this whole thing between spirituality and wealth, I think it's a very easy protection. It's very easy to say, well, I can't be spiritual if I'm wealthy. I mean, sure, I can become wealthy. I'd love to become wealthy, but you know what? I'm more interested in being spiritual. And I think that's bullshit. The truth of it is, you get to choose to live life whatever way you want to live life. I've chosen to live a life where I pursue spirituality and I pursue wealth. You see, that's my calling. That's what I discovered in the day when I saw the flagpole. That inside, when I look inside, I am called to pursue certain things. I call them my highest personal values. And very high in my values has always been, for decades, is to pursue a spiritual life. That's an internal calling. You do not need to call me up and go, Paul, why don't you meditate? Why don't you study spirituality? Internally, my nature is called to pursue that. But just as my nature is called to pursue spirituality, my nature is called to understand my finances and create financial independence in my life. And to me, the most purest version of spirituality is being all that you can be. There's a seed inside each of us. If you plant rose seeds in the ground, you get a rose bush. If you plant the seeds of an apple tree in the ground, you get an apple tree. We each of those seeds have planted inside of us. And just as the most spiritual thing a rose seed can do is blossom into a beautiful rose, the most beautiful thing, the most spiritual thing you can do is blossom into the person you are to become. So look inside, find what your true nature is calling you. Do not let anyone tell you that it is not spiritual to be wealthy, and do not accept that limitation for yourself. The most spiritual thing you can do is to look inside and go, what am I called to be? Maybe you're called to be a teacher. Maybe you're called to be a doctor. Maybe you're called to build a business. I don't know. But there's a calling inside of you, and the most spiritual thing you can do is to follow that calling. And for me, the pursuit of wealth is one of the most spiritual ways I can live life. It is my spirituality. Why? Because it's what I'm called to become. And that is true spirituality. True spirituality is looking inside, asking, who am I? What am I here to become? And living that life. So many people, for whatever reason, have decided that spirituality and wealth are opposing forces and never the twain shall meet. Leave them in their poverty consciousness. If that's how they want to live, let them live within those limitations. But surely it's not for you. If you're listening to this podcast or watching this YouTube clip, and if you've remained listening, then I know something here is resonating with you that says, I can be me. I can be true to me. I can pursue spirituality and I can also live in abundance, whatever level of abundance you decide is right for you. But the ultimate spirituality is you being you, whatever you are called to be. I hope I've given you some opportunity for thought in this podcast, maybe even triggered some emotion. And if I have, please take the time with a pen and paper to explore that and to begin to explore yourself so you know better who you are and you know better the path you need to walk. And if you find within that exploration that there is some degree of sense that you can't be a spiritual person, you can't be a good person, and also live an abundant lifestyle, maybe it's time you look that idea in the eye for the bullshit it is and begin to create a new life for yourself. This is the Inner Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm Paul Ryan, and thank you for listening. And hey, if you got some value from the show, please subscribe. It really helps us. Until next time, take care.